Hi everyone, I've just brought another video for you guys, so let's get started without further ado. Also, remember to like and comment. Tell me which manhwa you'd like me to cover next. Let's do this. The news reported a critical development on television. President Na Il-soo had officially become a fugitive, with an international police red alert issued for his immediate capture. The streets were filled with public outrage. Protesters demanded the arrest of those protecting Na Il-soo's case and the Udak faction, calling for the judiciary to wake up and save the victims. Far from all the commotion, the broadcast played on a portable screen. The urgent report contrasted absurdly with the leisure setting, resting next to an ice bucket and crystal glasses. Instead of fear, the news only provoked a mocking smile. The fugitives seemed to find the international situation more amusing than truly threatening. President Na Il-soo relaxed on his private yacht, enjoying the ocean breeze. A woman served him wine, acting as if the global arrest warrant was nothing more than an irrelevant joke. He held his glass with an expression of absolute confidence and arrogance. The chaos on land seemed like a distant memory that couldn't touch him in that luxurious refuge. The man drank the expensive wine with greedy enthusiasm. He was determined to savor every drop of his freedom and fortune, completely ignoring the consequences of his actions. Later, night fell over the ocean, enveloping the yacht in silence. The vessel floated alone in the vast darkness, far from any help or witnesses. Inside his cabin, the president slept soundly. The luxury of his quarters lulled him into a false sense of security. Isolated from the outside world, he remained completely oblivious to his surroundings, lost in a heavy and unprotected sleep, fueled by the excesses of the day. However, his peaceful rest was about to be interrupted. Something in the room's atmosphere subtly changed, pulling him from his dreams. The president opened his eyes and was met with a terrifying sight. An unknown man was sitting calmly at the foot of his bed, watching him from the shadows. The intruder maintained a rigid and elegant posture, dressed in an impeccable suit even in those circumstances. His presence dominated the room, radiating a silent and lethal threat. Na Il-soo's arrogance vanished instantly. His eyes widened in shock and dread as he tried to comprehend how someone had gotten in there. The mysterious man rose smoothly without saying a word. Na Il-soo recoiled against the headboard, realizing too late that there was nowhere to run. Shock paralyzed President Na Il-soo. Cold sweat began to trickle down as he stared at the unexpected figure before him. The intruder, on the other hand, maintained a disturbing calm. He watched his target with a cold and calculating gaze, showing no tension whatsoever. The power dynamic was clear. While the man in the suit dominated the space with his presence, Na Il-soo retreated on the bed, suddenly vulnerable. The president tried to articulate something, but fear locked his throat. The situation seemed impossible to comprehend. Suddenly, something more urgent occurred to him. He turned his face sharply, desperately searching for those who should have been guarding the place. Hope died instantly. His bodyguards lay unconscious on the floor, neutralized without him even noticing the fight. Cornered, Na Il-soo looked up at his captor. The intruder's silence was more terrifying than any verbal threat. A subtle and dangerous smile appeared on the man's face. He seemed amused by the corrupt politician's growing despair. The invader then presented a cell phone screen. Na Il-soo fixed his eyes on the numbers displayed, trying to process the financial information. His eyes widened in utter disbelief. The amount and the details shown there were something he did not expect to see at that moment. The man in the suit held the device indifferently, awaiting the inevitable reaction to that specific charge. Panic took over Na Il-soo. He knelt on the bed, gesturing frantically in an attempt to negotiate his safety. He shouted desperately about the principal amount of the debt, believing that all of this could be resolved with money alone. In a final act of cowardice, the president offered his own luxury yacht. He would hand over any material possession to get rid of that threat. The intruder raised his hand to his temple, exhausted. The president's pathetic shouting and desperate offers were only testing his patience. The yacht floated alone in the vastness of the night ocean. Far from the coast, the silence around indicated that there would be no help. The mechanical gears of the winch turned noisily, releasing the heavy anchor chain towards the dark waters. On the upper deck, the intruder's subordinates watched the scene with complete indifference, maintaining control of the situation. One of the men calmly took a drag from his cigarette, treating that moment of tension as just another routine job. The group leader made a brief gesture with his hand, signaling for his men to proceed with the execution of the plan. The iron chain descended violently, gaining speed as gravity pulled the weight towards the sea. Tied to the metal structure, President Na-il-su was thrown off the boat, hanging precariously over the aquatic abyss. The man screamed in absolute panic, feeling the terror of imminent death as his body swayed over the waves. However, the intruder stopped the fall. He sat comfortably with a laptop, turning the torture into a cold and calculated interrogation. Desperate and trembling, Na-il-su begged for his life, swearing repeatedly that he had no more money in his possession. Surrounded and humiliated on the bow of his own luxurious ship, the once powerful president looked tiny and helpless. The man in the suit ignored the pathetic wails, keeping his full focus on the information he was checking on his computer screen. Sweating profusely, Na-il-su tried to negotiate, promising to recover every penny if he just had one more chance to live. The intruder, however, remained relentless. He issued a chilling ultimatum. Either the money appeared, or the president would serve as shark bait immediately. The tense silence returned to reign on the deck. While the invader worked calmly, Na-il-su awaited his fate, completely at the mercy of his captors. Na-il-su screamed in pure terror, realizing that the situation had completely escaped his control and that his threats were ineffective. Cold sweat streamed down his contorted face as he stared at the brutal reality of his impending doom. While the intruder remained relaxed on deck checking his laptop, his men prepared the scene for the execution, ignoring the victim's presence. The man in the suit remained impassive, focused on his own thoughts, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding a few feet away. With a casual gesture, the order was given. Na-il-su looked back, paralyzed by fear as he realized the final decision had been made. The subordinates acted promptly, holding the prisoner with brute force and pulling the ropes as he tried to resist in vain. The commander's gaze was cold and calculating, watching every detail of the scene without showing any trace of humanity or hesitation. Desperate, Na-il-su tried to argue one last time, babbling promises about money in the futile hope of buying his safety. However, his pleas only provoked a cruel and sadistic smile on the face of his tormentor, who seemed to relish the pathetic spectacle. The man raised his hand, ending any negotiation. The sentence had already been decided, and there was no turning back. Without ceremony, the president was thrown off the boat, hanging precariously by the anchor chain over the dark waters. His cries for help were swallowed by the vastness of the ocean, echoing unanswered in the solitude of the night. While the victim trembled with fear and exhaustion, the intruder calmly checked his device, as if he were just checking an irrelevant notification. He then flashed a sly and radiant smile, asking with false courtesy if there was a problem, mocking the trauma he had just inflicted. The true hierarchy was revealed when the three men lined up and bowed respectfully before the young man sitting down, acknowledging his absolute authority. The man clenched his teeth, showing tension and absolute focus as he drove at high speed. Meanwhile, the intruder waited on deck. He wore a calm smile, as if he had been waiting for that very moment. A speedboat sliced through the dark waters, carrying a group of men rapidly approaching the yacht. Na-il-su heard the noise. The president, still in his robe, leaned over the railing, confused by the nighttime interruption. Suddenly, a blinding light hit him. The executive recoiled, surprised by the imposing approach of a larger vessel. The luminosity was too intense. The man tried to shield his eyes with his hand, unable to identify the source of the glare. There was nowhere to run. The Philippine Coast Guard had completely surrounded the private vessel with its fleet. Shock paralyzed Na-il-su. He stared at the lights, stunned by the sudden intervention of the foreign authorities. Far away, the atmosphere was one of silent opulence. The interior of a luxurious mansion displayed wealth in every architectural detail. An imposing portrait dominated the wall, watching over the room with the stern gaze of a founding patriarch. In the living room, powerful figures were gathered. The atmosphere was heavy as the men in suits awaited the unfolding of the conversation. The president of Tayson Capital took the initiative. With a subtle smile, he offered a drink, demonstrating calculated hospitality. The young man in the dark suit, however, maintained his posture. He held the glass respectfully but declined the offer politely. The veteran insisted on the interaction, touching the younger man's face with a familiarity that bordered on condescension. Beside them, the vice president of Taesun Capital watched everything. He held his drink, observing the power dynamics with attention. Cheon Suman remained silent, holding his glass with an indecipherable expression. He seemed immersed in deep thought, oblivious to the luxurious environment around him. The older man continued to speak, displaying a smile that mixed authority and a hint of malice. His words carried a weight that demanded full attention. The young man in the dark suit only listened, maintaining a respectful posture. He absorbed the instructions without showing any emotion, aware of his place in the hierarchy. The narrative visualized a scene of brutal violence, where physical force was the only law. Blows were struck mercilessly, subduing anyone who dared to resist. The scene changed to an open environment, focusing on the profile of a student. Sweat dripped down his face, highlighting the heat of the moment or the tension of an imminent conflict. Suddenly, the focus of his gaze sharpened. His pupil contracted, indicating a state of high alert and a keen awareness of the danger around him. Chaos erupted in the sand court. Surrounded by multiple aggressors, the boy began to move, dodging the initial confusion of bodies and fists. Kim Moo-hyuk faced the situation with a disturbing calm. Even outnumbered, he seemed to be in total control, as if time was running differently for him. One of the attackers attempted a direct hit, but Moo-hyuk reacted instantly. He fluidly dodged, causing the enemy's fist to cut only air. Taking advantage of the opening, the student counterattacked with ferocity. His fist connected solidly with the opponent's face, sending a shockwave through the impact. The fight continued without pause. Moo-hyuk spun and delivered a high, precise kick, repelling another aggressor who was trying to approach, maintaining control of the fight. The force of the blow was such that the attacker was thrown backwards. He fell heavily into the shallow water of the beach, raising a large splash with the impact. Under the scorching sun, Kim Moo-hyuk remained standing, watching the fallen bodies on the sand. Hostility still emanated from the place, but he remained unwavering. The young man's face showed no satisfaction or remorse. His eyes remained fixed and empty, focused only on the raw reality of the combat he had just waged. However, the fight was not over yet. Moo-hyuk turned sharply, surprised to notice a new movement coming from his side, ready to react once again. The impact was brutal, throwing the aggressor's head back violently. He lost consciousness before he even understood what hit him. The body was thrown away, falling into the water with a heavy thud. Kim Moo-hyuk watched the result of his strength, but the fight was not over yet. The student paused for a moment, noticing a new movement. His combat instincts immediately alerted him to the danger that was approaching. Two new opponents advanced at high speed, trying to flank him. They were shouting, hoping that numerical superiority would be enough to subdue the young man. Moo-hyuk, however, remained calm. His eyes followed the trajectory of the attackers with cold precision, calculating the exact moment to react. He moved fluidly, dodging the first blow. The aggressor's punch only cut through the air, finding the void where the target was seconds before. Taking advantage of the enemy's clumsy momentum, the young man spun his body. His agility transformed the defense into a perfect opportunity to counterattack. With an impeccable technique, he delivered a high kick that connected directly to the opponent's chin. The force of the blow launched the man into the air, neutralizing him instantly. The beach soon became a scene of defeat for the group. While several lay on the sand or tried to get up with difficulty, Moo-hyuk kept his guard up, watching the last one standing. Frustration and despair took over the remnants. Ignoring the difference in skill, they attempted a final coordinated attack against the student. Moo-hyuk's response was quick and devastating. He intercepted the attack with a straight punch, breaking the enemy formation before they could react. The fist connected violently with the aggressor's face. The force of the impact was such that the man was thrown backwards, completely stunned. The last opponent tried a desperate punch, but Moo-hyuk only tilted his body. He dodged easily, watching the enemy's open guard. Without hesitation, the young man buried his fist in the attacker's stomach. The precise blow took all the air out of the man's lungs, doubling him over in pain. The confrontation came to an end. Surrounded by opponents writhing in the sand or lying unconscious, Kim Moo-hyuk remained standing, demonstrating his total superiority. His gaze intensified, radiating a silent and overwhelming pressure that cut through the air. The remaining aggressors froze, shock showing on their bruised faces as they realized the real disparity in strength. Kim Moo-hyuk emitted such a threatening aura that he made it clear, without saying a word, that continuing the fight would be a fatal mistake. Fear instantly paralyzed the opponents. They hesitated, unable to take another step towards the student. The instinct for survival spoke louder. The group decided that escape was the only option and ran desperately away from there. With the threat finally dissipated, the adrenaline subsided. The young student let his body fall onto the sand, feeling the weight of exhaustion. He closed his eyes and let out a long sigh of relief, enjoying the brief moment of peace under the sun. However, his rest was abruptly interrupted when someone threw sand in his direction, breaking the tranquility. A freckled-faced boy appeared with a wide and energetic smile, seeming to find the situation funny. The newcomer leaned over Moo-hyuk, speaking with an irritating casualness that contrasted with the violence of the previous combat. Moo-hyuk stared at him, confused by the audacity. The other just made a peace sign, maintaining the joking tone despite everything. Suddenly, a third student appeared and put his arm around Moo-hyuk's shoulders with complete familiarity, joining the conversation. The taller young man displayed a confident and calm smile, acting as if nothing serious had happened in that courtyard. As the three gathered on the beach, the freckled boy asked a question that changed everyone's focus. They had no idea where they were. Lee Myung-soo kept his carefree smile, but Moo-hyuk's expression darkened as he realized the gravity of this new problem. XML Lee Myung-soo checked his friend's scalp, worried if he had been hit hard on the head during the previous fight. Kim Moo-hyuk, however, remained static. The sudden display of care caught him off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless. The other student, the freckled boy, watched seriously. He seemed to await a response about his colleague's physical condition. Ignoring the silence, Myung-soo continued to rummage through Moo-hyuk's hair. He needed to be sure there were no hidden serious injuries. Suddenly, a realization hit Kim Moo-hyuk. His eyes widened as if he had just woken up from a trance. The protagonist's attention completely shifted from the conversation. He turned his face, focused on something far beyond that beach. In the sky, a balloon advertised the local festival. That detail served as an immediate trigger for the young man's memory. Meanwhile, traffic in the city continued its usual flow. The outside world continued to spin, indifferent to the urgency that had just arisen. Kim Moo-hyuk's expression hardened instantly. He realized that he had forgotten something crucial or that he was terribly late. Without giving explanations, the young man jumped to his feet. His two colleagues remained on the sand, confused by the sudden change in attitude. Panic took over Moo-hyuk's face. There was no more time to waste on health checks or trivial conversations. He shot off in a frantic run along the beach. Lee Myung-soo and the other boy just watched, stunned, as he walked away. Kim ran with total determination. The intensity in his gaze revealed that he needed to get somewhere as quickly as possible. His steps braked sharply as he reached his destination. The haste gave way to a sudden stop before what he found. The young man stopped at the entrance to the room, paralyzed. Before him, an elderly lady lay fallen on the floor, confirming his worst fears. The image of a funeral weighed on his mind. Before the altar, the pain of loss crushed him, forcing him to bow in despair. Panic took over his senses. The young man ran frantically, sweat running down his face as the urgency of the situation consumed him. Memories of that house flooded his thoughts. The brick building seemed bathed in a nostalgic and warm light in his memory. It was a simple and quiet home. However, that small space represented the safe haven where they had built a life together. He recalled the times he came back from school. His grandmother always appeared at the top of the stairs, surprised to see him arrive before the usual time. Her concern was always immediate and gentle. She held his arm, questioning the reason for his early return with genuine affection. The touch of her wrinkled hands conveyed unparalleled security. Those were the calloused hands that had raised and protected him for so long. There were times when the sadness seemed unbearable. He broke down in tears, seeking comfort in the only embrace capable of calming his anguish. Since childhood, she had been present. The simple celebrations and shared smiles were proof of the unbreakable bond between the two. Her instinct was always to care. With a gentle touch on his face, she checked his condition, worried if her grandson was eating well. But not all memories were of peace. He remembered the sharp pain and the tears that streamed uncontrollably down his face. That day, outside the house, he couldn't hide his crying. She remained by his side, holding his hand and trying to understand what had caused such pain. Back to the present moment, he held the phone firmly. The expression on his face hardened, demonstrating a new determination. He listened attentively to the voice on the other end of the line. The situation demanded absolute seriousness and attention to every word. Alone in the phone booth, the young man made the necessary call. That was a step he needed to take, regardless of the consequences. Kim Moo-hyuk held the phone tightly, his somber expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. He knew that contact was his only option at the moment. The scene changed to the facade of Daehan Busan Hospital. It was there that his grandmother's medical emergency was being treated. His mind, however, was transported to the past, specifically to the year 1996. It was a different time, before skyscrapers dominated the city skyline. The city of Busan stretched below, vibrant and noisy. The sound of traffic and urban life echoed, indifferent to the dilemmas of those who watched it from above. On the terrace, young Kim Moo-hyuk seemed stunned under the strong sun. Sweat ran down his face as he tried to process the reality that surrounded him. Suddenly, a terrifying vision invaded his mind. The feeling of drowning, desperately fighting for air in dark waters, seemed too real. Threatening faces began to emerge in his memories. He recalled the cruel smile of an older man who exuded danger and malicious authority. The memory made the young man's blood boil. He gritted his teeth, feeling a mixture of hatred and frustration in the face of those figures from the past. Another man appeared in his thoughts, extending a bottle with a cynical and bloodied smile. Violence seemed to be everywhere, disguised as camaraderie. The student covered his face with his hand, trying to block the intrusive images. The weight of those associations seemed too overwhelming to bear at that moment. XML, but the ghosts persisted. He pictured the burly man in a suit, toasting arrogantly, confident in his untouchable power. And there was also the one with cold eyes and scars, relaxed with his drink. They were men who shaped the world around him through brutality. However, something changed within him. Kim Moo-hyuk pulled his hand away from his face, his eyes revealing that despair was turning into focus. He raised his head, staring at the sky with a new determination. The confusion had disappeared, giving way to a silent, cold resolve. With his name emblazoned on his uniform, he clenched his fist tightly. At that moment, the young man decided he would face anything to survive. His gaze narrowed, focused, and intense. There was a silent tension in the air that demanded his immediate attention, interrupting his thoughts. The young man turned his head as he sensed an unexpected presence on the roof. Someone was back there, invading what should have been a moment of solitude. A man covered in tattoos and wearing hospital clothes was lounging on the bench. He exuded a casual arrogance, smoking as if he owned the place, indifferent to the rules. The protagonist watched him cautiously, trying to identify the intruder. The figure before him was unknown to him at that moment, but the aura of danger was evident. The tattooed patient seemed amused by the situation, displaying a smug smile. He maintained a relaxed posture, ignoring any social etiquette in front of the newcomer. Confusion showed on the boy's face. That random encounter on the top of the building didn't seem to make immediate sense, leaving him on alert. Supported by a burly bodyguard who appeared behind him, the injured man openly mocked. He seemed to be provoking, confident in his position of power and numerical superiority. The silence between them became heavy as they stared at each other. The tattooed man cast a look of disdain, measuring the young man up and down with impatience. Lying comfortably, the delinquent called the boy's attention with total disdain. The relaxed attitude contrasted with the tension that was beginning to form in the environment. The man's expression changed, becoming more irritated and demanding. He seemed to expect everyone around him to obey his whims or recognize his importance immediately. Suddenly, understanding hit the protagonist like a lightning bolt. The name echoed in his mind with weight and danger. That was Park Dong-soo. His reputation preceded him darkly. Park Dong-soo was known as the heir to a powerful criminal organization, a man before whom armies of subordinates bowed. These were turbulent times in the country. The government had declared a national and aggressive war against organized crime, promising to use all its power to eradicate groups like his. Memories of brutal violence were intrinsically linked to that name. The world from which Park Dong-soo came was marked by spilled blood and cruel fates. Back in the present, Park Dong-soo's gaze confirmed his ruthless nature. Even injured and in a hospital, the threat he posed remained intact. The tattooed man noticed the boy's gaze and didn't like it. Arrogantly, he questioned whether the student knew who he was messing with. To the criminal's surprise, Kim Moo-hyuk just turned his back and went on his way. The young man's indifference irritated the gangster, while his bodyguard laughed at the situation. Park Dong-soo felt his pride wounded. He wasn't used to being ignored like that, especially by a simple high school student. The young man, however, remained alert. Even as he walked away, his eyes followed the men's reaction, calculating the danger. The criminal broke into a provocative smile. He decided he wouldn't let the boy leave without hearing a few more words of mockery. Kim Moo-hyuk considered the man's attitude childish and pathetic. He tried to remain calm, finding that interaction a waste of time. But the gangster didn't give up and shouted again, launching a question that echoed across the roof. The student stopped immediately, unable to ignore the call. Moo-hyuk's expression changed instantly. Disinterest gave way to a sharp and dangerous look as he heard what the man had to say. Realizing that he had finally captured the boy's attention, Park Dong-soo displayed a malicious, triumphant smile. The student turned slowly, facing the pair once again. The relaxed atmosphere of the roof disappeared, replaced by a palpable tension. The man pointed to his own face, questioning mockingly whether the young man didn't recognize his figure or the marks of his life in crime. Kim Moo-hyuk, however, remained unshakable. He watched the criminal with a cold gaze, without showing any sign of intimidation. The gangster continued to speak and gesticulate, laughing at his own authority, trying to impose fear through his relaxed and threatening posture. But the boy's lack of reaction began to bother him deeply. He questioned, incredulously, how a student could remain so calm before him. The situation left Park Dong-soo visibly frustrated. He put his hand to his head, confused by the audacity of that young man who refused to fear his reputation. The criminal stared at the student, confused by such audacity. Kim Moo-hyuk, however, maintained his firm posture, looking down without showing any sign of fear. Park Dong-soo ended up laughing at the situation, dismissing the young man with a casual gesture. Realizing that the tension had dissipated into mockery, the protagonist turned his back and walked away. The young man descended the silent stairs, leaving the roof behind. That strange encounter didn't seem to have shaken his composure as he returned inside the building. His face remained impassive. Kim Moo-hyuk kept his thoughts to himself, maintaining the cold expression that had become his trademark. He walked through the empty hospital corridor. As he approached his destination, the student prepared to put external problems aside. Basil, however, upon entering the room, he hesitated. Something about the atmosphere felt different than usual, indicating that this wouldn't be an ordinary visit. His grandmother was lying in bed, looking frail. But what caught his attention was the imposing figure in a black suit standing beside her. The man watched the patient with a serious and inscrutable expression. His presence there was unexpected and carried a weight that filled the room. The two men stared at each other immediately. The stranger turned toward the door, and Kim Moo-hyuk stopped, surprised to find an unknown person watching over his relative. The student frowned, clearly questioning the situation. He had no idea who that visitor was or what his intention might be there. To avoid disturbing the patient, the conversation had to change location. A cafe near the hospital served as the setting for the necessary clarification. Sitting face to face, silence prevailed. Kim Moo-hyuk awaited an explanation, while the man in the suit maintained a professional and calm demeanor. Without preamble, the stranger made his move. He slid a business card across the table, formally introducing himself to the young man. Kim Moo-hyuk picked up the object, reading the name engraved on the dark surface. He tried to connect the pieces, seeking to understand the reason for this sudden approach. The man watched the student's reaction carefully. There was a confidence in his gaze, as if he knew that this meeting would change the course of things. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and mourning. The young man remained seated on the floor, crushed by loneliness before the portrait of the deceased. His solitary vigil, however, was interrupted. A tall man in a dark suit appeared in the room, observing the boy from above with an inscrutable expression. Back in the present, the tension shifted to a coffee shop table. Kim Muhyuk stared at the stranger, awaiting an explanation for this sudden approach. The visitor began to speak seriously. His words carried a weight that indicated that this meeting was no accident. Muhyuk listened attentively, analyzing every detail. The initial distrust gave way to a cautious curiosity about what this man really knew. The man continued with his narrative. He seemed to know facts from Muhyuk's past that few could possibly know, connecting distant events. The conversation deepened, making the atmosphere even denser. The visitor spoke with the authority of someone who held the answers the young man sought. Suddenly, a specific revelation struck Muhyuk. He realized that the stranger knew far more about his personal life than he should. The young man processed the information with an intense look. It became clear that this man's intentions were complex and demanded full attention. A momentary silence filled the space between them in the coffee shop. The gravity of the matter hung over the table as both assessed the next step. The man in the suit maintained eye contact, unwavering. He waited patiently, confident that his words had had the desired effect. Muhyuk, however, frowned skeptically. Accepting that story immediately was difficult, and he mentally questioned the veracity of it all. The image of his grandmother came up in the discussion. The mention of her raised the stakes, turning the conversation into something urgent and personal. The memory transported him back to that dark day in the past. The man had been there, standing in the funeral room, exactly as he had described. In that moment of old pain, the visitor had merely observed the boy's suffering. Now, the connection between that grief and the present became undeniable. The man's words weighed on him like a giant hand. The young man realized that, without that hidden financial aid, his studies would have been impossible. He remained silent, processing the harsh reality of his situation. The revelation about the origin of the support shook his understanding of the facts. Unable to continue listening, the boy stood up abruptly. The conversation in the coffee shop had reached its limit. There was a moment of hesitation before leaving. The weight of those discoveries left him visibly disturbed. Maintaining respect, he gave a formal farewell bow. Despite the discomfort, etiquette had to be maintained before that man. The interlocutor merely watched, impassive. He knew that the seed of doubt had been successfully planted in the boy's mind. Outside, the young man walked under the watchful eye of the man in the window. The surveillance over him continued, even from a distance. He continued his way down the sidewalk, immersed in thought. The solitary walk only served to increase his unease. Upon arriving at Daehan Busan Hospital, a new urgency took over him. He needed to confront the only person who could confirm the story. The sudden entrance into the room startled the elderly woman. Her expression changed instantly from repose to alarm upon seeing her grandson's state. The young man stared at her seriously, looking for signs of lying. There was no time for niceties. He demanded the truth. He pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed, establishing a climate of interrogation. The tension in the room was palpable. Without preamble, he questioned her about the phone number used to contact those people. The specific question caught his grandmother off guard. The elderly woman couldn't hide her guilt. Her gaze wavered, silently confirming that the secret had been discovered. Her reaction was all the answer he needed. The boy realized bitterly that his suspicions about her involvement were real. XML. Grandma remained silent, processing the weight of the conversation. Worry etched her face as she realized her grandson was no longer an innocent child. Instead of prolonging the interrogation, the young man enveloped her in a sudden hug. It was a firm gesture, seeking to end that moment of tension with affection. However, his expression wasn't one of relief. His eyes carried a cold and serious determination, indicating that he had already made a difficult decision about what to do next. He slowly moved away from the hospital bed. The hug served as a silent farewell, preparing him to leave that safe environment and face the world outside. The young man maintained contact for another moment, engraving that feeling in his memory. He knew that upon leaving that room, things would change irreversibly. The scene shifted to the capital. Night fell over Seoul, with the city illuminated and vibrant, hiding the machinations of the corporate underworld in its shadows. In a prime and secluded area, a luxurious mansion stood out in the darkness. The place exuded wealth and power, serving as a fortress for its occupants. Inside the opulent office, a white-haired man remained seated with his back turned. His relaxed posture indicated that he was the owner of that territory. Before him, a subordinate in a dark suit and robust appearance kept his head down. He waited respectfully, demonstrating total submission to the seated figure. The older man smiled, pleased with what he was hearing. He held a cigar with the naturalness of someone accustomed to being in control of the situation. The president of Tayson Capital displayed an expression of contained triumph. The pieces on the board seemed to be moving exactly as he wished. The atmosphere in the office was solemn. While the leader remained at ease at his desk, the subordinate awaited new orders, ready to execute any command. The president then rose from his ornate chair. The meeting was over, and he seemed ready to take the next step in his plans. With a calculating look and the cigar still in his hands, he contemplated the immediate future. The confidence on his face suggested that he expected no real opposition. The day dawned, bringing a new reality. Students walked calmly towards the gates of Dongsong Technical High School, oblivious to the plots of the previous night. The young man entered the classroom crestfallen, carrying a visible exhaustion on his shoulders. He seemed to want to avoid any eye contact as he crossed the door. As soon as he settled into his desk, a nearby classmate tried to get his attention, raising his hand in a casual greeting. The boy, however, kept his gaze averted. The other student leaned in, curious about his friend's silence. The newcomer, however, ignored the approach and focused only on opening his backpack. The classmate continued to speak with a friendly smile on his face, oblivious to the tension emanating from the boy next to him. Without responding, the young man removed his school supplies from his bag. His movements were mechanical and distant, as if his mind were trapped elsewhere. Suddenly, an order to prepare for class cut through the air. The tension in the young man's body instantly spiked upon hearing the command. The shock was visceral. He stood up abruptly, his eyes wide with terror, attracting the confused and surprised gazes of all the other students in the room. The classmate next to him tried to restrain him, holding him firmly. The young man, however, seemed desperate and struggled to escape that restrictive embrace, overcome by panic. Terror completely dominated his expression. Cold sweat ran down his face as the reality of the moment seemed to collide with a traumatic memory. The narrative then shifted away from the school, revealing the imposing facade of a luxurious mansion in the daylight. Inside the office of that residence, the young man was seated before a figure of authority. The silence in the room was heavy and oppressive. He listened attentively, with an expression of resignation and seriousness, absorbing every word that was spoken in that solemn environment. The older man, sitting in front of him, watched him with a stern and calculating gaze, emanating an aura of unquestionable power. The man then stood up, turning his back to end the matter. The sudden movement caused the young man to look up, caught off guard by the attitude. With his back to the boy, the older man remained silent, making it clear that the final decision had already been made and there was no more discussion. The young man remained seated, listening to the harsh words of the authority figure in front of him. There was a clear hierarchy in that room that demanded total submission. Kim Moo-hyuk absorbed what was said in silence. His gaze lifted, demonstrating that the message had been received and understood. The older man turned his back, ending the interaction without saying anything more. The student simply watched the figure walk away, feeling the weight of that conversation. A blank expression took over his face. He seemed to have accepted his fate, hardening his own spirit for what was to come. Some time later, isolated in a dark room, he dedicated himself obsessively to his studies. The rigid discipline became his only reality in that claustrophobic environment. However, his body carried the true cost of that life. Under his clothes, his back was covered in bandages and scars, marks of a brutality endured in secret. Back in the school environment, Moo-hyuk maintained the same intense focus. He filled his notebook without pause, completely ignoring the world around him. In the hallways, the routine continued as normal for the other students. The noise of carefree conversations contrasted with the silent isolation of the protagonist. The peace was shattered when an instructor stormed into the place yelling. Wielding a baseball bat, the man imposed his presence through immediate intimidation. Silence fell over the class as the teacher took his position. He observed the students with disdain, making it clear that violence was a teaching tool there. With a sharp bang on the table, the man demanded absolute attention. The sound of the wood striking served as a warning that no one should dare defy him. The young man stood up from his desk, standing out from the others. The teacher fixed his gaze on him, ready to exert his usual authority. The entire room remained still, watching the silent confrontation. While everyone else remained seated, Moo-hyuk stood, isolated in the spotlight. The instructor's expression, however, transformed into shock. Something in the posture or gaze of that specific student caught him completely off guard. Moo-hyuk just stared back, displaying a disconcerting calm. He seemed oblivious to the threat the bat represented, reacting with an unexpected serenity. The teacher brandished the baseball bat before the class, demanding immediate submission. He was determined to make the student an example of discipline for the others. To humiliate the young man, the instructor lightly touched his forehead with the tip of the bat. It was a deliberate and arrogant provocation, testing the limits of the student's patience. The lack of immediate reaction only enraged the man further. The teacher held the makeshift weapon firmly, waiting for any excuse to escalate the violence. However, the young man remained still. His gaze showed no fear, only a stoic coldness that seemed to silently challenge the man's authority. The teacher's patience ran out instantly. In a brusque and uncontrolled movement, he delivered a violent slap to the boy's face. The impact turned the student's face, but he didn't flinch. The aggressor, far from being satisfied with the first blow, readied his arm for a second attack. Another blow cracked through the silent room. The violence was gratuitous and excessive, a desperate attempt to break the student's unwavering composure. The man screamed as he struck, visibly frustrated at not getting the response of pain or pleading he desired. The young man just accepted the punishment, head down. The teacher's fury increased with each second of silence. He yelled insults, trying to impose his dominance through fear and verbal intimidation. The heavy hand struck the student once more. To the watching class, it was a brutal scene. To the boy, it seemed just a passing inconvenience. The instructor raised his arm for the final blow, his face twisted with hatred. He was completely out of control, seeking a reaction at any cost. But Kim Moo-hyuk's expression remained unchanged. There was a dangerous boredom in his eyes, as if that physical pain was insignificant compared to what he already knew. His mind traveled to another tense moment in the past. He remembered his grandmother, sitting humbly before a man in a suit, offering her hard-earned savings. On that occasion, he decided to intervene. The young man firmly grabbed the collector's hand, preventing his grandmother from handing over the money she had struggled so hard to get. Back in the reality of the classroom, the punishment changed form. Moo-hyuk assumed the position for physical punishment on the floor, obeying silently as the teacher watched, still armed. The teacher readied the blow violently, determined to continue the physical assault without any hesitation. The anger showed on his face as he raised the bat. Suddenly, the classroom door was thrown open. A man in a suit burst into the room, yelling to interrupt the brutal scene that was unfolding. The newcomer confronted the aggressor with obvious fury. The teacher, caught by surprise in the middle of the act, sweated, paralyzed by the shock of that unexpected intervention. With the bat still suspended in the air, the instructor was confused, not understanding the situation. On the floor, Kim Moo-hyuk just turned his face, watching the interruption of his punishment. Outside, the atmosphere was solemn. A serious and well-dressed man waited patiently, indicating that this visit was not ordinary. He opened the door of a luxury car, making an inviting gesture. The young student approached, ready to leave the school environment behind. As Moo-hyuk entered the black vehicle, the entire school stopped to watch. From the windows of the classrooms, dozens of students watched, murmuring about that spectacular departure. The teacher remained in the room, his face pale and his eyes wide. The realization of the gravity of the situation hit him, leaving him stunned before the other students. Upon entering the back seat, the young man hesitated for a brief moment. He realized that he was not alone inside the car. An older man, exuding authority and reading a newspaper with indifference, occupied the seat next to him. His presence dominated the confined environment. Moo-hyuk watched the figure carefully, recognizing the seriousness of the moment. The young man's expression hardened before that unexpected encounter. The man, who wore an eye patch, maintained a rigid and impenetrable posture. The lines on his face denoted a life of hard experiences and consolidated power. Outside, the driver maintained his guard position next to the luxurious vehicle, contrasting with the school building in the background. The silence inside the car was heavy. The older man seemed immersed in his thoughts, purposefully ignoring the tension that was building. Sitting side by side, the gap between generations was visible. While the man looked ahead, the young man stared at him, awaiting the purpose of that summons. The young man remained silent, processing the sudden change in his destiny. The older man leaned in, whispering words that sounded as much like advice as a veiled threat. He assessed the boy with a penetrating gaze. There was something in the student's posture that sparked his genuine interest. As the car continued on its way, the man explained that life rarely forgave the weak. He spoke with the unwavering authority of someone who had already seen and survived everything in that underworld. The boy absorbed the weight of those words, feeling the gravity of the situation fall upon his shoulders. However, he maintained his composure. Part of him understood exactly how harsh what was being said was. The man continued his narrative, describing a world where strength was the only valid law. His eyes narrowed as he mentioned the potential he saw. He recognized the same hunger in the boy. The student finally turned, facing the one who now seemed to control his immediate future. The doubt on his face gave way to a cold understanding. He was ready to hear the final proposal. The man then allowed his story to surface, transporting himself to times past. There was a time when he commanded legions, and everyone bowed before his absolute power. Now he extended his hand to the young man, revealing his true identity as the legendary Lone Shark King. The city below them was the vast board where this brutal game would be played. Kim Muyuk remained calm inside the luxury vehicle. He knew he was facing someone powerful and needed to measure each reaction carefully. The older man watched him with cold scrutiny. He was looking for any sign of weakness or hesitation in the student he had just picked up. However, Muhyuk's mind was working feverishly. He began to connect the dots about the situation and what it could offer him. The chairman spoke seriously, exposing the brutal reality of what was at stake. There was no room for naivety in that dialogue. The young man brought his hand to his face, covering his eyes. For a brief moment, it seemed that the weight of those words had crushed him. But upon removing his hand, a manic smile distorted his features. The presented perspective did not bring him fear, but an insane and sudden euphoria. He realized that the perfect revenge against the Cheon brothers was not physical. The real blow would be to take the colossal fortune they expected to inherit. The gray-haired man noticed that drastic change in behavior. The gleam of ambition in the boy's eyes did not go unnoticed. Muhyuk looked outside, but his mind was focused on the newfound goal. He no longer saw himself as a victim, but as a player. The chairman continued to probe the boy. He needed to be sure that this audacity was not just a momentary outburst from a teenager. The student turned to face his interlocutor directly. The doubt had disappeared, giving way to a calculating certainty. The older man remained impassive, absorbing the defiant posture that the boy now displayed without reservation. A smile of confidence and mockery shaped Muhyuk's face. He was ready to accept the game, glimpsing the final prize. As the car continued on its course, the dynamic between the two transformed. The young man listened attentively, aware that this conversation would define his future. The chairman narrowed his eyes, intrigued. He realized that, finally, he had found someone capable of understanding the language of greed. The older man observed the student sternly. There was a silent and palpable tension hovering between the two inside the vehicle. He closed his eyes for a moment, containing his irritation. The boy's attitude in front of him was dangerously testing his patience. The director looked away towards the window, trying to maintain his composure and distance. Meanwhile, Muhyuk remained seated, emanating a silent and defiant aura. The man maintained his rigid and authoritarian posture. He needed to reaffirm to himself who was in command of that situation. However, something suddenly changed in his expression. A sudden and alarming realization crossed his mind as he observed the young man. Muhyuk raised his finger to his temple in a provocative and mocking gesture. He signaled with scorn about his own mentality in front of the director. The shock immediately showed in the older man's eyes. That open and direct insolence was something he had not foreseen. He turned, incredulous, to face the young man who was now watching him intently. The power dynamic inside the car seemed to have shifted in an instant. The director felt a growing nervousness, with cold sweat betraying his tension. Moo-hyuk's unpredictability made him visibly uncomfortable. The student, in turn, maintained a penetrating and calculating gaze. He showed no sign of intimidation in the face of authority. The man remained silent, processing the veiled confrontation. The boy's audacity and coldness were deeply disturbing. Both retreated into their own thoughts, without saying a word. The atmosphere in the back seat became heavy, laden with unspoken resentments. Moo-hyuk's mind wandered to memories of his family. He recalled his mother's past and how, despite her academic brilliance, fate had been cruel. The authoritarian figure in his memories remained relentless. It was a shadow of the past that seemed to fuel his determination in the present. Back in reality, the director cast a distrustful glance sideways. He realized belatedly that the young man next to him was a much greater threat than he appeared. The older man pondered aloud, questioning if the young man before him possessed the necessary worth to enter that exclusive world. He remained silent for a moment, awaiting a reaction that would justify his attention or confirm his suspicions. Kim Moo-hyuk, however, maintained an expression of cold indifference, as if the judgment of others was irrelevant to him. The student stood motionless in his uniform, listening to the harsh words without showing any sign of nervousness or submission. Something in the young man's unwavering posture caught the executive's attention, who noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere inside the vehicle. The tension increased when the young man finally broke the silence, responding in kind and challenging the authority of the man beside him. Moo-hyuk didn't hide his disdain, making it clear that his ambition wasn't limited by the rules the other was trying to impose. A confident and slightly disturbing smile appeared on his face, revealing a much darker nature than it seemed. The older man closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the audacity of that unexpected and calculated response. Suddenly, he burst into laughter, genuinely amused by the arrogance and destructive potential he had just witnessed. The laughter ceased, replaced by a serious look of mutual recognition. He had found someone who spoke his language. The executive smiled with satisfaction, convinced that he had discovered exactly the kind of monster he was looking for his purposes. At that moment, the older man's influence loomed over Moo-hyuk like a demonic shadow, sealing the young man's fate. The young man accepted that dark weight, his gaze hardening as he assimilated the darkness of the path he would now tread. The vehicle sped off, kicking up dust, leaving Moo-hyuk alone on the road, but irrevocably transformed by the silent pact he had just made. Kim Moo-hyuk exhaled the smoke with total indifference. The young student showed no respect for school rules or the authority around him. He remained motionless in the empty courtyard, isolated. His posture suggested that he had already accepted the consequences of his actions, or perhaps that he didn't care about them. The young man then made a disturbing statement. With an intense look, he stated he was willing to embrace his monstrous nature if that's what they expected of him. Meanwhile, life went on in the city's busy avenues. Traffic flowed oblivious to the personal conflicts that were unfolding. Inside a black sedan, Executive Cheon-suman traveled in silence. His driver kept his focus on the road, aware of the imposing presence in the back seat. The driver cast a discreet glance in the rearview mirror. He attentively observed his passenger's reactions, awaiting any instructions. The executive maintained a serious and indecipherable expression. He seemed to be evaluating something far beyond the urban landscape passing by the armored window. The vehicle continued its steady journey along the highway. Inside that machine, lessons about power and perception were about to be shared. The silence was broken when the older man began to speak. He decided to share his cynical wisdom about human nature with his subordinate. He meticulously listed the vital signs of manipulation. To him, every physical detail, from the gaze to the tone of voice, was a tool to be mastered. Cheon-suman analyzed these characteristics with the precision of a predator. He explained how correctly reading these signs revealed people's true intentions. The driver absorbed every word, watching his mentor's reflection in the mirror. This was a lesson on human behavior that he couldn't ignore. The man behind the wheel maintained his stoic expression as he drove. He understood the gravity and practical utility of those dark teachings, Having said what he needed to, the executive leaned his head back on the seat. He closed his eyes, ending the lesson with the tranquility of someone who holds absolute control. The driver checked his passenger one last time with a sidelong glance. His boss's ruthless philosophy had been successfully transmitted. The memory transported him to a quiet road, far from the chaos of the present. The young Kim Moo-hyuk walked with an impenetrable expression, wearing his school uniform as if it were armor. He walked through the hospital corridors, ignoring the movement of patients and nurses around him. Suddenly, something interrupted his walk, forcing him to stop and pay attention. A delinquent-looking patient cornered him, invading his personal space with an intimidating and malicious smile. The man openly mocked the student, gesturing exaggeratedly to ridicule his serious posture. Without showing fear or irritation, the young man calmly reached into his uniform pocket. The delinquent, however, only displayed a pack of gum, offering it with a condescending and provocative smile. Satisfied with his own prank, the man walked away dancing, saying goodbye with a gesture of total disdain. Moo-hyuk remained motionless in the hallway, watching the small object that had been left for him. Iksamal. He held the pack of gum, but his cold stare suggested that this trivial interaction would have serious consequences. The result was brutal. The man who had mocked him now lay motionless in a pool of blood, while the student watched the scene with complete indifference. Later, outside, Moo-hyuk fixed his attention on another figure who was leaving the place carelessly. He found himself facing a group of armed criminals, one of them brandishing a knife with clear hostile intent. Far from backing down, Kim Moo-hyuk faced the imminent threat with a slight smile of confidence and defiance. Kim Moo-hyuk stopped in the hospital hallway, watching the group of men who had just passed him. Their presence was out of place in the medical environment. A calculating glint appeared in his eyes. The young man immediately realized that these were not ordinary visitors. Meanwhile, at the front desk, the nurse on duty was trying to maintain her work routine. The tranquility was broken when a case of drinks was slammed hard on the counter, startling the employee. The men surrounded the reception desk, intimidating the woman with aggressive demands and a threatening posture. Suddenly, Moo-hyuk interfered in the situation, bowing deeply in an exaggerated gesture of respect that confused the criminals. With a helpful smile, the student pointed the way, offering to guide them to where they needed to go, away from the front desk. The three men exchanged suspicious glances, finding the boy's sudden subservience strange, but decided to follow him. Moo-hyuk's friendly expression disappeared. His only motivation was to avoid a disturbance at the hospital while his grandmother was in surgery. The young man led the group out of the building, walking calmly towards an isolated area in the back. The criminals followed him into the narrow alley, believing they had complete control over the situation. As soon as they reached the deserted spot, the charade was over. One of the men pointed his finger, shouting threats and demanding submission. Moo-hyuk, however, remained impassive. He faced the hostility with a disturbing coldness. The group's patience ran out. The leader violently pulled out a knife, determined to injure the insolent student. Surrounded and facing blades, Kim Moo-hyuk just stretched his shoulders. He was finally free to deal with them without witnesses. The criminals froze, surprised by the sudden change in that man's attitude. Moo-hyuk remained still. Even wearing hospital clothes, he exuded a dangerous confidence that made the others hesitate. The first bandit, however, didn't wait to see. He launched a straight punch, aiming to end it quickly. The attack came fast and violent, leaving no chance for any conversation or negotiation. The aggressor put all his strength into the blow, certain that he would knock down his opponent with a single move. There was a dull, heavy impact when the fist finally met its target. However, Moo-hyuk didn't even flinch. He absorbed the blow while maintaining an expression of total indifference. The bandit's fist stopped against his forehead. The aggressor realized too late the abysmal difference in strength between them. Before the man could back away, his arm was captured. Moo-hyuk squeezed his wrist with crushing force. With a fluid movement, the patient delivered a high kick, taking advantage of the enemy's open guard. The impact launched the man into the air, leaving him completely disoriented and defenseless against the brute force. Another gang member tried to take advantage of the distraction, attacking with blind fury as his companion fell. It was a fatal mistake. Moo-hyuk used the momentum of the attack to hurl the second opponent violently against the ground. The rest of the group watched in shock. Their arrogance instantly disappeared when they saw their companions defeated so easily. Muhyuk pulled the fabric away from his shoulder, revealing the intricate tattoos that marked his skin. Now, they knew exactly who they were dealing with. The aggressor advanced with the knife in his hand, determined to end it with a single fatal blow. However, the protagonist reacted with lethal precision. He deflected the blade and connected a devastating hook to the enemy's chin. The other two hesitated, shocked. The ease with which their companion was neutralized completely changed the atmosphere of the alley. The man in the suit collapsed on the asphalt, unconscious. The immediate threat had been eliminated in the blink of an eye. Without wasting time, the young man grabbed the fallen opponent by the hair. The next in line watched the scene, paralyzed by fear. He used the inert body as a human shield, throwing it against the others to destabilize any attack attempts. Then, the protagonist did something unexpected. With a casual movement, he freed his foot from his green slipper. Propelling himself into the air, he jumped with impressive agility, holding the footwear like an improvised weapon. The blow was humiliating. He smacked the rubber sole hard against the second attacker's face. The impact distorted the man's face. More than physical pain, that attack carried an absolute disdain. The young man landed lightly, ready to turn the humiliation into real and definitive damage. A high and powerful kick hit the target squarely, launching the gangster away violently. The body flew and fell on top of the first defeated one. Now, only one gang member remained standing. The last man froze. Seeing his partners piled on the ground, the reality of the situation hit him hard. Terror overcame loyalty. He spun on his heels and fled desperately, abandoning the fight without looking back. The tattooed man advanced without hesitation, ignoring his own injuries. His opponent, in a panic, raised a window frame in a desperate attempt to create a barrier between them. The defense proved useless against the violence of the attack. With a devastating punch, the man shattered the glass and wood, hitting the target squarely through the obstacle. The impact was brutal and immediate. The aggressor was thrown back forcefully, his body spinning in the air before colliding violently against the ground. The tattooed man observed the result of his strength, victorious. His enemy lay unconscious on the concrete, completely unable to continue the fight. The scene changed, revealing the tension on the tattooed man's face. Right behind him, the student Kim Muhyuk maintained a stoic expression, watching the situation cautiously. In the hospital hallway, the atmosphere became almost comical. The patient laughed loudly, boasting about his violent deeds and gesturing wildly, to the evident discomfort of the boy beside him. A vision of authority took shape, where both walked ahead of a group of men in suits. They led the pack with a confidence that dominated the surrounding environment. Meanwhile, a burly man watched the scene from a distance. He seemed oblivious to the tension, focused only on finishing his bag of chips. The patient brought a cigarette to his mouth, staring at the observer with disdain. His relaxed posture hid a latent threat that intimidated those nearby. The student tried to walk away, turning his back on that chaotic figure. He seemed determined to go his own way and avoid more trouble. However, the tattooed man did not allow the escape. He turned quickly, calling the boy's attention with an intense and inquisitive look. The two stopped in the middle of the empty hallway. There was a clear distance between the gangster's relaxed posture and the student's defensive rigidity. Breaking the personal space, the man put his heavy arm around the young man's neck. He forced an intimacy and camaraderie that were clearly not reciprocated. The patient's malicious smile contrasted with Kim Muhyuk's cold and resigned look. The student seemed trapped in that unwanted interaction, unable to break free. With no option to refuse, the young man accepted the forced company. The tattooed man guided him down the hallway, consolidating that strange and invasive alliance. The patient stared at his interlocutor intensely, proposing a clear exchange. He offered something valuable in return for what the other wanted. The young man listened to the proposal in silence, maintaining a skeptical expression. He seemed to ponder whether it was worth accepting those conditions. Suddenly, a sudden realization hit the older man. The understanding paralyzed him momentarily, like an electric shock running down his spine. The narrative went back in time, transporting itself to October 1990. It was a period marked by official pronouncements and drastic changes in national politics. In the news at the time, the message was omnipresent and threatening. The government had officially declared a total war against organized crime, The repression reached an unprecedented level, sweeping the underworld. Entire gangs were hunted and cornered like rats before the light. Back in the present, the tension in the hospital hallway remained palpable. The young man maintained his cold posture in the face of the revelation. The patient observed the boy's reaction, looking for any sign of agreement. He seemed to expect that the gravity of the past would influence the present decision. However, the protagonist turned his back and began to walk away. The older man remained standing, declaring that this was, above all, his desire. As the young man walked away, silence settled again. The physical distance between the two increased, leaving the proposal suspended in the air. The memories of that turbulent time returned, focusing on an isolated hideout. It was a simple house, lost among the mountains and autumn vegetation. Inside the refuge, the old television tirelessly broadcast the same news. The campaign against crime dominated all frequencies. The subordinates, hidden in that location, consumed the information with evident panic. Newspapers and broadcasts confirmed that the siege was closing. The leader, however, tried to maintain his composure while resting on the floor. His men, worried, murmured about the critical situation of their allies. Losing patience with the group's nervousness, he sat up and gave a stern order. He demanded that everyone maintain discretion and avoid causing unnecessary problems at that critical moment. The newspaper headlines confirmed the gravity of the situation. The declared war against organized crime was not just a rumor, but a real threat that was beginning to surround his world. Back in the hospital hallway, the tension in the air became palpable. The patient watched the young man walk away, clenching his fists with a mix of frustration and helplessness at his sudden departure. The boy, however, stopped and cast a sidelong glance full of meaning. There was a subtle and defiant confidence in his posture, indicating that he was not at all intimidated by the criminal's presence. That unexpected reaction left the man completely stunned. He remained motionless, processing the shock of having his authority ignored and challenged so casually by someone he considered inferior.